Good afternoon. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and stand. My name is Graham Honecker. I'm filling in for your president, Trina Raudebush, today, she's traveling a lot right now, so she is somewhere, I think in Indiana. But welcome to the greatest Kiwanis club in the country. We're a humble group, but that's how we bill ourselves. To start, I want to bring up Carol Orbison for the pledge and invocation. Carol?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In anticipation of the 107th Indy 500, I'd like to recite a verse. You'll be happy that I'm not going to sing this. Back home again in Indiana, and it seems that I can see the gleaming candlelight still burning bright through the sycamores for me. The new mown hay sends all its fragrance through the fields I used to roam. When I dream about the moonlight on the Wabash, how I long for my Indiana home.
Thank you, Carol. I now want to introduce Roger Cummings, who is going to introduce our guests and has some club announcements.
Thank you, Graham. And again, welcome everyone. We do have some guests today. Back in the back, we have Mr. Ray Higginbottom with the Action Club from our club. Any other guests at that table? At this table, we have one of my nieces, Elizabeth Iozo.
Thank you.
My wife, Lonnie Cummings. Other guests over here at this table, we've got a couple of members from the Center for Leadership Development. You'll be meeting them in a little bit. They'll be up here. So thank you all for coming, and hope you enjoy your lunch. I know the program's going to be great because Graham's leading it.
And there's lunch on Monday.
Yes, there is a lunch on Monday. I really appreciate Roger leading these. So that's at Iozo's, a great place. A couple club announcements. Very sorry to hear the passing of Tom Dunham's beloved wife, Patty. There will be a memorial service on Monday the 29th at Center Grove Christian Church in Greenwood. The showing is at 10 a.m. and the service is at 11 a.m. I want to thank Roger for stepping up to help Jason Burke select our East Scholarship recipients from Butler and the University of Indianapolis. Jason is looking for a few more people to do this on Zoom in the coming weeks. And Jerry East was a generous donor to the foundation, and his gift also allows us to fund the football, basketball, and female athlete scholarships annually. Carol, I need you to come back up. Carol is going to talk about the officer slate for the upcoming year.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you. As a past club president, I want to thank all of the leaders who have stepped up to serve the club. I'm very pleased to announce the slate for the 2023-24 year. Trina Raudebush will continue as immediate club past president and serve as foundation president in 2024. Club president designate Mary Bulk. Treasurer Roger Cummings. Steve Farrow and Art Kodroff begin 3-year terms as directors. Jackie Clincy, Laura Holloway, Chuck Cotterman, Wendy Paddock, and Max Harper will continue to serve as directors. As operations manager, our wonderful Kelly Olis is appointed as secretary ex officio. Many, many thanks to Bill Dubois and Duke Haddock, whose terms end on September 30th. And we will have voting to approve the slate, which opens in 2 weeks. Graham, I think you're up next.
Couple other reminders. We have for upcoming programs, next Thursday we're on Zoom with Dana Pohl. She's a true crime podcast host. There are like 1 million of these true crime podcasts. I listen to like 4 or 5 of them. So true crime is a popular thing. And director of community at Uncovered, the nation's largest database of cold cases. No meeting on the 25th, just prior to the Indy 500, which is amazing that we're already at the end of May, or close to the end of May and Memorial Day. Flags for Good founder Michael Green joins us as a speaker on June 1st. Bring a worn or tattered U.S. flag to be retired by American Legion local scouts, BSA Troop 303. On June 8th, Exodus Refugee visits us at the Columbia Club to provide a recap of the $11,000 grant for youth programming and World Refugee Day. And then we'll have a Zoom meeting on June 15th, and then online programming will be available for the Kiwanis International Convention on June 22nd. So a lot going on. Now we have our speaker on an honorarium presentation. And do we have a check as well?
Yeah, we're gonna give it to them after the meeting.
Okay. You don't trust me. I lost one of those checks in the past year. So. It's like one of those big ones. I don't know how I did that. Thanks to the Indianapolis Kiwanis Foundation of Indianapolis, we're pleased to present a $500 check on behalf of all of our January through March speakers to the Center for Leadership Development. I'd now like to welcome President Dennis Bland and Director of Development C.C. Reed Woodard to tell us more about the Center for Leadership Development. So come on up.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. I'm so honored. I just had a brief conversation with Leonard Hoops, and he's giving me his remarks, so I'll be presenting for him. I have the honor of serving with an organization called the Center for Leadership Development. It's been around since 1977, where its mission is to create a pipeline of African American youth who would one day serve our community as professional, business, and community leaders. So we're a talent development agency, as I sometimes like to describe our work. One thing that's unique about our work is that our organization offers a values-based youth development approach to helping young people realize their potential. So our entire youth development construct is built off the foundational belief that we as humans live a value system, meaning our values tend to get the best of us. Our dollars, our concentration, our focus, our eyes, our feet, our hands, obviously our wind and our breath, they tend to go in the direction of what we value most. And so the Center for Leadership Development says if that's how humans tend to operate, then what happens if you can get hundreds of young people who are putting their energy, focus, concentration, potential in the areas of character, education, leadership, service, and career. Character development, educational excellence, leadership effectiveness, community service, and career achievement. We said if we're able to do that, then we can create for the city of Indianapolis one of the most exceptional youth development program models that can be found anywhere in the country. So that's our vision, to give the city of Indianapolis a youth development program that's without peer. One of the things that's on my mind as I close about the work that we do, it struck me a couple of years ago that there was an iLearn test, and from the iLearn results, there was a school 3 or 4 blocks from our center And the results from this one school, the percentage of students who passed both the English and math sections of iLearn, the percentage of these students at this school that passed the English and math section was blank percent. And so for a little crowd participation, anyone want to take a guess on what that pass rate was?
15.
I heard 15. 15 going once, going twice. 15. Anybody else want to venture? 25, 25. 10%. Oh, wow. 10%. Not. The pass rate was 1.4%. So if 350 students, elementary grade students, took that iLearn exam, two or three of them actually passed, so proficiency in math and English. So when you see in the Center for Leadership Development's Principles for Success, educational excellence, it means we care about these things and we're thinking about these things. We started a RISE campaign 5 years ago that would create satellite locations in 5 of our city's highest crime, lowest income areas, where we would go and give young people an education on an education. This is why an education is such a big deal. Because we don't assume young people know just because they're going to school. We said we're going to double the size of our space so we can meet the young people in these satellites, bring them to our center where there's more in-depth and more one-on-one help and support. So today, we set a $33 million goal. We have raised $31.8 million thanks to a wonderful Indianapolis community, leaving us a balance of $1.2 million to raise. That's going to help us make this youth development experience a reality. So I'll close with a quote from Frederick Douglass, who says, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." Joe Malin was a little bit more poetic, and he says, "Better guide well the young than reclaim them when old, for the voice of true wisdom is calling. To rescue the fallen is good, but 'tis best to prevent other people from falling. Better close up the source of temptation and crime than deliver from dungeon or galley. Better put a strong fence around the top of the cliff than an ambulance down in the valley." We don't want to be reactive, we want to be proactive, and that's the work that we do. Thank you all for your support, and I'm looking forward to hearing Leonard. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bland, and again, thank you to the foundation for the I wouldn't lose that check. I lost the smaller check, but I wouldn't lose that one, so we'll present that at the end. It's now my pleasure and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker today, Mr. Leonard Hoops. Is that not the greatest name ever for someone representing Indianapolis? Leonard Hoops, President and CEO of Visit Indy, leads a team of 58 industry professionals charged with growing Central Indiana's nearly $6 billion convention, tourism, and event business. He will speak today, or he will speak during National Travel and Tourism Week and share more about Visit Indy's centennial year as one of the 5 oldest convention visitors bureaus in the country. Visit Indy has shattered all-time records for convention and tourism sales, been named the #1 convention city in America by USA Today, and ranked as a top visitor destination by the New York Times. Condé Nast Traveler, Travel and Leisure and Time. Visit Indy has also been recognized as a best place to work in Indiana for 7 consecutive years. Previously, Mr. Hoops was Executive Vice President and Chief Customer Officer of San Francisco Travel, Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of the Sacramento Convention and Visitors Bureau, Senior Vice President of Marketing of the San Jose Convention and Visitors Bureau, and manage corporate communications for a $1 billion global division of FMC Corporation. I would say, having moved here from Louisville 11 years ago, just incredibly impressed what Indy does in terms of attracting conventions, and know a couple of the folks who work for Mr. Hoops, and just really an incredible organization. So he's going to tell you more. Mr. Leonard Hoops.
Well, thank you, Graham. I sometimes get asked what exactly is a hoops, because I don't look like anything in particular. And my father is an English, Scottish, Irish guy. His family came from Yorkshire, England in 1683 with William Penn. And hoopses were apparently a derivative of hooper, so we were like barrel makers. And then my mother's East Indian from Trinidad. So I just tell people I'm your typical English, Scottish, Irish, Indian American from Trinidad. And that makes a lot of sense to people. But yeah, hoops is a pretty good name for this job. It helps with the job interview process. So I'm going to tell you about, this is National Travel and Tourism Week nationwide. And so we're all celebrating our industries. Indy is about a $5.8 billion convention and tourism and sports economic impact. And it fuels about 83,000 jobs in this region, full-time equivalent jobs. So a lot of part-time. In fact, tonight is something we call the Rose Awards, the recognition of service excellence. We do it every year. It's the Academy Awards of Frontline Hospitality. It's at the Indiana Roof Ballroom. It's sold out. We have a lot of people there tonight, but it's basically the folks who take care of you in hotels, restaurants, even Indigo drivers who get recognized at this thing. Tremendous people, the people who fuel Hoosier hospitality. So it's a fun week for me, and I'd love to tell you about what's going to be actually a little bit, I'm going to squeeze in about 20 minutes, 156 years of Indy history and 100 years of Visit Indy history. So with that, the first conventions. What do you think was supposedly the first year we ever had a convention in Indianapolis? Take a guess. It's not 1.4%.
1950.
I'm going to tell you, 1866. A 28-year-old Colonel Eli Lilly, recently promoted to that rank, organized a reunion of 288 Union soldiers after the Civil War. And then 15 years later, in 1881, he organized another reunion, and it had gone from 288 to 86,000. And then in 1893, a few years before his passing, he organized another reunion of, and I don't know how they counted this because they didn't have like online registration, but supposedly 300,000 attendees at that reunion in 1893. Now, where do you put 300,000 people in Indianapolis? They were building the monument at the time. So it was, they all came through Union Station, most of them did. And the few well-to-do of those retired Union soldiers stayed in the handful of hotels we had. And the rest of them pitched tents all over town, all over Indianapolis. And so that's how they got 300,000. But those were our first conventions. Now after that, after Colonel Lilly passed, and frankly most of the Union soldiers from the Civil War passed, they didn't do those anymore, and so they didn't have a whole lot of conventions anymore, and there was no formal effort to go get them. And Indy sort of got back on the map in 1909 with the opening of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the first Indy 500 in 1911. The first version of Visit Indy is the Detroit Convention and Visitors Bureau, and they were founded basically to help bring conventions and meetings to Detroit with this fledgling horseless carriage thing that they were working on. And so they started having these meetings as it related to the automobile industry. And so Indy started capitalizing on that, which is why we were fairly early to that game. And in fact, by 1923, we'd actually been founded. So we're 100 years old this year. We started as a committee of the Indy Chamber, what is now called the Indy Chamber, but we were called the Indianapolis Convention and Publicity Committee. And we were funded by $1,000. And a few years later, I think it was 1932, we actually became our own completely separate entity where they said you need to have a bigger team, you need to start being really proactive about bringing these conventions to town. And we did really well. This right here, you can't see it, but in 1925, we were one of the 5 most visited convention cities in America. On that list was Chicago, New York, Indianapolis, Philadelphia, and Kansas City. Why do you think these cities were on that list?
Transportation.
Ding, ding, ding. We were a railroad hub. So Union Station, the first of its kind, was in fact the O'Hare or Atlanta Hartsfield or JFK or LaGuardia at the time. And so we had a huge advantage with our central location and our railroad service. And so it made it really easy. If somebody needed to get across the country to a meeting, Indianapolis was a perfect place to do that. Now, unfortunately, by the 50s and 60s, we were pretty much off the map. We had not kept pace with other cities, with our convention facilities and our hotels, and we had missed out on the opportunity to be an airline hub. And people weren't taking trains anymore. And so we fell out of the top 25, much less the top 5. But in 1965, the city and county got together and said, city and state got together and said, let's create something called the Capital Improvement Board. And their first big project opened 7 years later in 1972, the Indiana Convention Center. So if you go out to where the JW is, that corner, on down, halfway down the block of Maryland, that was the Convention Center of 1972. And that got us back into that game. And we've been in that game now for 50 years. We also developed a sports strategy, as we all know. By 1979, the Indiana Sports Corporation was formed to work together with Visit Indy, then called the Indianapolis Convention and Visitors Association, the city and the state, et cetera, to bring sports events. And we've done pretty well with that, right? We built Market Square Arena in 1974 for the Pacers. We built the RCA Dome in 1984 with no football team, and then lured the Colts. I mean, that was the kind of bold thinking that you took back then. 1987, we hosted the Pan Am Games. 1987 was the first year we had the NFL Combine. We've had it every year since. 1999 is when the NCAA moved from Kansas City to Indy. 1999 is also when we opened then Conseco Fieldhouse, now Gamebridge. 2008, Lucas Oil Stadium opened up. 2012, we hosted the Super Bowl. And in 2022, we hosted the College Football Playoff National Championship. Now, in addition to all this, we hosted a bunch of Final Fours, including the entire NCAA tournament in 2021, as you recall, when they tried to do it in a bubble before vaccines were widely available. We also have had an infrastructure strategy. We have the #1 airport in America. Who likes using our airport? It's a heck of a lot better than going anywhere else, right? Well, it's been the #1 ranked airport in America since 2012, every single year, for customer satisfaction. Now, we don't have the greatest lift in the world. We don't have the airlift of a Hub, an O'Hare, a LaGuardia, et cetera. But we do have the best convenience. It's 15, 20 minutes max from downtown. Our flights are pretty consistently on time relative to most airports. They're all not that great these days, but we're better than most, and because we don't get the sort of weather challenges some of these other cities do. And then in 2011, we had our last major expansion in the convention center. We added about 80% more exhibit space, and we did that by blowing up the RCA Dome. So once Lucas Oil Stadium opened up, we were able to take the space where the RCA Dome is and add halls H, I, J, and K, some additional meeting rooms, and that's where we stand today. We also opened the now 1,012. It was 1,005 rooms at opening, now it's 1,012 rooms, JW Marriott, and that put us on the map, in particular with people who like Marriott product, but a lot of national conventions and others started paying more attention to us in 2011. And our real calling card against bigger, better funded, more hotel room, better airlift cities is this connectivity package. We've got 12 hotels that are connected directly to the convention center by Skywalk. Some of them you don't even realize, like the Le Méridien on Illinois, you can actually, it's in Illinois. You can go up to the second floor, take a stairwell, and you'll be in the mall. And from the mall, you could walk directly to the convention center. So if it's raining cats and dogs, or if it's snowing or whatever, you can literally get from Le Méridien to this hotel, to the convention center. Same thing with Embassy Suites, to the Arts Garden, etc. So we've got more hotel rooms connected by climate-controlled skywalks than any city in America, which we like to remind people it doesn't make any difference whether it's December or it's July, it's 72 degrees in the skywalks, more or less, right? And that's been a winning strategy for us. So if you look at where we were back in 05 to 07, those were the last years of the old convention center before the JW, where we were not yet pre-selling the new JW and the convention center expansion. And we were booking somewhere around 495,000 rooms a year for that 3-year average. So the way, that metric that we use to measure our success or challenges on a year-to-year basis is contracted room nights. So when we book FFA or the fire department instructors or Gen Con, we will get contracted hotel rooms. They will sign contracts with hotels for X amount of rooms, for X amount of nights, and we add them all up, and at the end of the year, That number in 2005 to 7 averaged 495,000 rooms for the future. So we might have booked a convention in 2010, in 2005, and that counted toward that number. So that gives you kind of how the baseline, how this is set. Well, in 08, we began pre-selling the JW, which was going to open in 11, and that number jumped from 495 to 675. And that was a pretty big deal because the consultants who were hired to look at what Indianapolis could do, or they thought we would be able to do with this new package, was they thought we would go from about 500 to about 625. We were beating that by 50,000 room nights a year before the doors opened. Then the doors opened, 2011, and there's some people want to kick the tires and walk on the carpet and look at the rooms and actually see it before they buy it. It jumped again to 735,000. Well, 2014, USA Today did a poll of some meeting planners and some online vote and things like that, and we ended up winning. Meeting planners loved, again, that connectivity. All these hotels connected by skywalks, the easy campus. I mean, we're here at the Circle, and it's a couple block walk to the center, the stadium, Game Bridge, all the restaurants, etc. And we were named USA Today's the #1 convention city. We started putting that on every billboard, every ad, every email. And look at the jump we took that year. 735,000 room nights booked. We went to 880. It was a complete transformational stair-step change in how successful we were. And we consistently hit those numbers from 14 to 19. 880, 904, 883, etc. In the 2005 to 19 timeframe, 05 being the last year before the pre-sale, 19 being the last year before the pandemic, we went from 22 million visitors to over 30 million visitors a year. We went from 3.4 billion in visitor spending to 5.8 billion in visitor spending. 65,000 jobs to 85,000 jobs. State and local taxes more than doubled. A huge economic engine. And I will tell you, there were a lot of people before the JW opened and this convention center expansion who said it was going to fail, and who were terrified about, like what we're talking about now with the Signia Hilton and the Pan Am Plaza expansion that we're talking about. And there's a lot of people who don't want that built because we're going to fail. Every time we've done something, whether it's build a stadium with no football team, whether we've done a JW with a 1,000-room hotel, we make that work. And we're going to make this next one work too, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. But the pandemic came. So one of the things I used to tell people about the pandemic, because they would always say, hey, we're all in the same boat. And we're not all in the same boat. We're in the same storm. Different boats. Some people got some good, sturdy boats. Some people are in little boats that were falling apart and crashing down the rocks. Indy was a pretty sturdy boat. We actually reopened the convention center in July of 2020, before vaccines were available or anything like that. And we had to get Dr. Box and Dr. Kane to sign off on it, and they were not happy at first, so we asked. And we were not going to be Sturgis. We weren't going to be some motorcycle rally in South Dakota where there's no rules and do whatever and people die. People masked. Not a whole lot of conventions wanted to do it, but what few did came to Indy. Mostly youth sports, youth basketball, gymnastics, volleyball, things of that nature. Well, in November of 2020, I get a phone call from the NCAA, and they said, we see you managed to open up, and we're thinking about doing a bubble for the 2021 tournament. And Andy Mallon, who runs the Capital Improvement Board, and I got NDA'd and spent non-disclosure for that time period, and we spent nearly a month negotiating with the NCAA, our hotels, who were not fully back open in many cases, and a whole bunch of youth sports groups that had already booked the convention center for March of 2021. Which looked great when we booked them, but was problematic all of a sudden, and they didn't want to move because they had nowhere else to go. So after rocking in the fetal position for about 3 or 4 weeks negotiating with these guys, we finally got that deal done with the support of the governor and the mayor and others, and then Sports Corp did the incredible job they did of actually running the tournament. But it was a big win for us. It just reflected that some of us were in better boats than others during the pandemic. So we reopened, as I said, in July 2020. We gained market share. We hosted the entire tournament. And where have we been since then? Well, that 2020 number obviously dipped significantly, but very few destinations booked anywhere near 575,000 room nights in 2020. We did that because we didn't have to lay off a ton of our staff. We took, everybody got a 20% pay cut by taking Fridays off unpaid. Our executive team all took 40% or more. I was close to 50 to get through that period. Don't worry for me, I did just fine nonetheless. And we kept our team together that way. In fact, many of the hotel's salespeople weren't working during that time. and calls for hotel bookings in the future were coming to us, and we were taking care of them for that. A lot of cities, like my ex-employer in San Francisco, we were at 62 people at Visit Indy. We went to 51, but only 2 or 3 of those were actual layoffs. Most of them were positions we chose not to refill, that sort of thing, so attrition. My old employer in San Francisco went from 75 people to 25 people because they just couldn't figure out how to make that work with their budget. And so even city, and then Chicago, very similarly, they lost a ton of their staff during that period, lost a ton of their business, much of it to Indianapolis. So the last couple of years, we've come back nicely, 703 in 2021, almost 800,000, back to where we were right around there in 2019. And we will beat that, I'm confident, in 2022 or 2023. So what's next for Indy? Well, we still have a heck of a lot of sports on the calendar. We have, in 23, we already had the Combine and the Horizon League men's and women's basketball. We have Big Ten football this December. Next year is an incredible year. We've got the NBA All-Star Game. It was supposed to be 2021, and that will be in February. And we've got USA Swimming. So after losing USA Swimming the last 3 bids to Omaha, Nebraska, who had really focused on being a swimming destination, we are building pools, 3 pools in Lucas Oil Stadium, and we'll have 35,000 plus folks in Lucas Oil Stadium to watch the Olympic swimming trials, which is going to be incredible. So 1 competition pool and then a big, a barricade that will, actually we don't have the diving, it's separate, but the barricade will hide the warm-up pools and practice pools. And then we have more Horizon League basketball and again Big Ten football. And then 25, we've got the regional games for the men's tournament. 26, we have our next men's Final Four. 28, we have our next women's Final Four. And then 29, just 3 years after the 26 one, another men's Final Four.
We also have the NIT championship.
Yes, we probably should add that to the slide because NIT's coming to Butler, coming to the field house.
I
So.
didn't get a plug in there.
Absolutely. As well you should have. We'll update the slide. I mean, we've got plenty of room over here. So, we also are staying the #1 convention city in America. In the coming years, we've got, we just hosted American Chemical Society, another actually thing that was helped significantly by leadership from Eli Lilly, from the Lilly Company, helped us book that convention. American Dental Association's coming. One of the things we took away from Chicago was something called the Sweets and Snacks Show. It's a great show. We've been running 25 years as an annual in Chicago. It's a show of the National Confectioners Association. So think Hershey, Mars Wrigley, these kinds of companies are their big exhibitors. Well, they couldn't meet in 21 in Chicago under Illinois laws and Chicago laws, and so because again we had demonstrated with the NCAA and other things, we were able to host them. And lo and behold, on the last night of the convention, before the last day, I get a call from the guy who runs the show for National Confectioners. And he said, the CEO and their COO would like to meet with you for breakfast tomorrow. I said, sure. Met him for breakfast over at the Capitol Club, and or at the Capitol Grill, and they were like, much to our surprise, Hershey and Mars Wrigley and all these big players really like it here and want to look at you guys for the future, even though we're technically contracted in Chicago for a number of years. Well, that led to us rebooking them for 2024, 25, 27, 28, 30, 31. The in-between years are going to Vegas, Chicago, zip. Sorry, Chicago. American Society of Association Executives is coming in 26. That's the Super Bowl of association meetings. That's the CEOs of the National Association of this, the American Society of that. That's who you want to get to bring your conventions. A lot of time meeting planners fall in love with Indy. They love the connectivity, the airlift, the ease of working with us. The CEOs are like, Indy's not sexy enough. We're not San Francisco or New Orleans or Nashville even these days. But I think the Signia project gets us a lot farther on that scale than others. But ASAE, you need the CEOs to see for their own eyes that their meeting planners are advising them correctly. We've got another number of other things on there, but it's all great. A lot more medical business. One of the things I learned is you have to be able to say this one right here, the American Academy of Otolaryngology. You have to be able to say it to book it. Otolaryngology, by the way, is the ears, nose, and throat, the ENTs, if you didn't know what that was. But we've now mastered that word. So, Indianapolis is the most group-dependent city in America. That's good and bad. It means that I've got job security because our hotels and convention center desperately needs Visit Indy to do our job well. because we put more groups in. There's 3 kinds of business that goes into a hotel. There is the business transient, kind of that individual business traveler. There is the group business that we spend most of our time on, and then there's that leisure traveler, which we spend a fair amount of time on. Leisure travel has come back, as you probably know from your own travels, significantly since the pandemic. It's 100% plus. If the 19 year is the index year, we're over that in 2022, 2023. Group business nationally is not quite there, but we are already back. We're over the 100 index. Business transient's about 60, 65%. And we don't know for sure how it will come back with Zoom and all the other things. I think eventually it does come back. At some point, especially if you're working remotely, you want to go on the business trip. You want to connect with your friends, at the convention or see your customers face to face and that sort of thing. But it's taking its time to get back there. Most of the forecasts I've seen say that doesn't get all the way back, that leg of the stool, until 2026. But the others, we're already back on the group side, and again, leisure hit that like late 21 even. So the group occupancy. So what are we doing to make us less dependent on group business while also maintaining our #1 market share on group business? And it's what we call the Indy destination vision. So back in 2014, we started something to make Indy a must-visit destination. And we did something a little different than other cities. Some other cities like Vancouver, Canada, Denver were doing similar things at the time. And we saw a flaw in their process, which was get a whole bunch of smart people together, like Kiwanis people and city people and hotel people and restaurateurs and entrepreneurs and you name it, and get their ideas and put together a plan, and then 2 years later everybody goes their own ways, and maybe you did 2 or 3 things on it, but it didn't stick, it didn't gain traction. And so we said, how do we make this thing a permanent, ongoing process? And we did that in 2 ways. One, we have a second board that's our foundation board. It's really designed to get checks from nonprofits and things like that if somebody needs to send it to a 501c3. And the this board, Tourism Tomorrow Indy, we reformulated it to be a permanent steering committee of this vision. So think the director of the Department of Metropolitan Development, Department of Public Works, people who are entrepreneurs and run their own businesses, like Keystone is one of their folks is on our TTI board. Those kinds of folks, the airport, others who are involved in making product for our city. And this has been a great success for us, having those folks at the table, because now somebody gets an idea and they start running it through this TTI board, through this destination vision. The other part of this is we created a position for a vice president of destination development, a full-time senior management person on our team who works with the city, who works with private developers and others to shepherd these projects, to help address roadblocks and hurdles and things of that nature. And then we even expanded that department. We hired a guy, Brad Bobian, who used to be the city's top planner under the DMD director, to be his #2 in that department. And so now we know somebody who knows exactly how the city thinks, what the issues are with zoning and planning, how developers think, what they run into. And so I think we've been really helpful in getting some projects moved along as a result. So the White River, let me go back here, whoops. Somehow I did something. What did I do? Let's see. Go to next, maybe. No. All right. Now we go. Okay, there we go. That's good enough. All right. So the White River Vision is one of them. So the 58 miles, linear miles from southern Marion County to northern Hamilton County is a good example of this. So Hamilton County was doing their thing, Marion County was doing their thing, and we said, look, this is central Indiana. Rivers don't know boundaries like that. Except when you draw state lines like Ohio and Kentucky and Indiana and things. But, the river doesn't know if it's in Marion County or Hamilton County. And so we put together a consortium of leaders in Hamilton County and the city to start working on a White River Master Vision. They cobbled together some money from both counties, and now we have this kind of grand plan of what I would describe as a 58-mile linear national park. It doesn't have that designation, but the idea is to have this mix of leave the river alone here, do some development here, and have some combination of things where it's pristine in its natural format, and it's things where you want to kayak and canoe and fish and swim even. Well, now we get to this project. This is a pretty big deal. So in 2014, a bunch of those customers I was talking about earlier, like Gen Con and FFA and PRI, and particularly the fire department instructors, said to us, I know you just opened this convention center expansion in JW 3 years ago, 2011, because this was 14. But based on our trajectory, we're going to outgrow you in the next decade. So you better start planning now for your future, because these things take 10 years to get off the ground between the studies and the regime changes in city government and et cetera. Well, 2017 is when it finally started gaining some traction with Mayor Hogshead's office, and they asked us to do a study. So we hired a company called HBS, who is a leader in this kind of field, and they said, you know what? You probably need a 50,000 square foot ballroom. Your ballroom, Sagamore, 32,000 square feet, would be the junior ballroom in a lot of cities. For comparison's sake, Columbus, Ohio has a 74,000 square foot ballroom in their convention center. Ours is 32. We've been losing some business for groups that need a bigger ballroom to Columbus, and that's the main reason. They also just expanded their Hilton to be over 1,000 rooms, so now they have a comparable hotel to our JW. Atlanta is building a Signia Hilton hotel right now. It opens in January of 2024. It's right next to their convention center. Las Vegas just spent $2 billion to do an expansion of their center, and they announced yesterday they're going to spend $600 million to refurbish the old part so it feels more like the new part. So $2.6 billion in the course of a couple of years. That's who we're competing against. Now, a lot of people say this is an arms race that we can't win, but the reality is if we invest in our infrastructure about every 15 years, we not only keep up, we usually gain market share because we just do it better. So we don't have to spend as much, but we do have to spend something to keep our market share, to keep our sports, to keep our conventions. So in 2018, the project got announced with Kite as the developer on Pan Am Plaza. They own the land. And they actually announced it as 1,400 hotel rooms, 2 different towers, and this ballroom of 50,000 square feet and others. And the hoteliers, the owners, were very upset about this, and they ultimately led to a compromise of one 800-room tower, the Signia, that is proposed right now. And then the plan was for Kite to go to market in 2020, pre-pandemic, remember, because their pro forma looked awfully good with the historically low interest rates and what this project was believed to be generating per this HVS study. And then 2020 comes as they're getting ready to get to that point. They've negotiated nearly the final details with the city. March hits. Tom Hanks gets COVID. And once Hanks got COVID, everything got messed up. And they couldn't go to market. And so the City County Council did historically vote 25-0 in September of 20 to approve the convention center expansion part. I mean, 25-0, who gets that vote for anything anymore? We just don't see bipartisanship like that anymore. And so that moved forward, and then the other hotels again said you can't start construction on this as yet, even though rates were still decent at that point. But the banks weren't sure about would this business ever come back. I mean, this is pre-vaccines. And so the Kite agreed with the city to delay the project another 2 years because we expected then, with a 36-month build, you'd open to a robust market in the end of 2025. Well, 2 years later, there's been 10 Fed rate hikes. A $300 million hotel tower is now $510 million. The Kite pro forma that looked like the golden goose in 2019 looks terrible in 2023. It can't be done privately by a developer. And Atlanta figured that out, frankly, a year before we did in Indy. And they did revenue bonds for their hotel in 2021, and now we're talking about it in 2023. And their project is going to open in January. And they are the most likely group to take FDIC and FFA away from us because that's who the runner-up was in the last 2 bid cycles from us. So, and they have better airlift. And so this is a real thing about, we're in a situation now, if we don't get this across the finish line, we're all in this room at some point going to read a headline in the next 2 to 3 years that says FFA and FDIC leave Indy for Atlanta after Signia scrapped. That's a real likely headline. And you don't backfill FFA and Gen Con and FDIC. Gen Con would likely go to Chicago with another FFA. If you think about this business as a pyramid, they're at the top of the pyramid. There's a little few groups that are sitting there at 60, 70,000 people. Most of the business is at the bottom of the pyramid, and that's 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people. That's who you backfill it with. So it takes you a decade or more to get back, more than that likely. It took us decades to get to this point, which is why this project is so critical. So the mayor's office and Dan Parker, the chief of staff, and Andy Mallon with the Capital Improvement Board, Scarlett Andrews at Department of Metropolitan Development looked at Atlanta's model and said, we can do this. Because the interest rates for tax-exempt revenue bonds are about 400 basis points lower than what a Kite could go get. And then if a city sells the revenue bonds, the city, by law, because it's tax exempt, can't make a profit. All of a sudden, the pro forma now works again easily because the interest rates are significantly lower. The city doesn't have to make a profit, whereas Kite would have had to in order to make their equity partners happy. And all of a sudden, the pro forma works. And so right now, what's sitting with the council got introduced on Monday and will be voted on in a committee on next Monday. And then potentially voted on in June, on June 5th, would be this idea of selling revenue bonds to pay for this tower. Now, a lot of the owners are upset about this, but it's a misguided upsetness, I think. This is a public project designed to help protect their assets. We know the studies, we're very confident at Visit Indy that our numbers are going to go up. We're going to keep FFA and FDIC and Gen Con and others. We also know of a whole bunch of medical groups like the otolaryngologists and others who want to look at Indy, American Dental, et cetera, who's already booked us. And so we know we're gonna fill these dates, and so I think, you know, it's the same fear that happened when we built JW. It's the same fear when we built a stadium and had no team. There's gonna be fear. I have no doubt that we're gonna sell the crap out of this thing and pre-sell it to the point where it's gonna be extremely successful. We gotta get it over the finish line. So that's the reality. I see a lot of stuff online like, oh, if Kite couldn't do it, then why in the hell is the city doing it? Well, the city, and then I also see things like, if they got $500 million for this thing, why aren't we, you know, building better schools and this and that? The $500 million only exists because the project would generate the $500 million. That's how revenue bonds work. So if there is no hotel to generate the revenue to pay these bonds, there is no revenue. There's no $500 million. So the city doesn't actually have $500 million laying around. It's a project that pays for itself. And the beauty is, any developer, any of the existing hotel owners can walk in a year from now, 5 years from now, whatever, and say, I would like to buy this hotel from you, city. The city has no desire to hold on to this project. They just want to get it out of the ground, save the business that is threatening to leave, keep up with Atlanta and Las Vegas and Columbus, Ohio, for that matter. And so that's where that project stands right now. So I hope we'll get there. I'm gonna end with a fun little quiz for you. What city is this? How about now? What city is this? There we go, St. Louis. You know it now though, right, with the arch? What city is this? Not in DC's, because you see a little rotunda there. It's a flat city with a river. What's Indy?
Flat city.
No oceans, no mountains, and they're not there either. Probably the #1 brand for a destination in the world, the most popular place to propose marriage. They didn't want this tower. It was proposed for Barcelona. They didn't want it. And then the people running the World's Fair in Paris had to convince the Parisians it was worth building, and they promised to tear it down after. They didn't. But what a difference an iconic structure can make, right, in a city. So a lot of people, so I tell people all the time, we're a flat city with a river, just like they are, but Paris spent 2,000 years building product, building culture. We've only had 200 years to do it. But guess what? What city is that on the left? Well, that city is Orlando, Florida, 100 years ago. Orlando, Florida, population 9,000 100 years ago. Now it's that. The city on the left, Las Vegas, 1923, population 3,400. Who the hell wanted to go there? A desert hellhole. And now it's the #1 visitor city in America along with Orlando. So they've done in 100 years what Paris did in 2,000 years. To the left, that's Singapore. Singapore is 280 square miles of city-state. Indianapolis is 360 square miles of city. They are smaller than us. This here on the right is the same as what's on the left. That was built in a 5-year time span. It's now the #1 attraction called Gardens by the Bay in South Asia. They did that in 5 years. I don't care if you need 2,000 years, 100 years, or 5, it can be done. And you got to do projects like this Signia and this Pan Am project to make it work. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hoops, and congratulations on all the great work, and keep us posted if the Kiwanis Club can help you out. I'm gonna ask you to come back up here because we've got a certificate for you. In appreciation of the time spent sharing with members of the Kiwanis Club of Indianapolis, A donation is going to be made in your honor to New Shoe Day. This will help them to provide 2,500 new shoe days, should be new shoes, to Central Indiana youth in under-resourced communities to empower them to move, play, and make friends like kids should. Their mission is to uplift the world's well-being. So again, we're going to be making that donation.
That's terrific, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I hope they get some dress sneakers.
Yeah.
That's all I worry with dress sneakers.
And I also have certificates for Mr. Bland and Miss Reed Woodward. So she's still here. If you want to come up here. Thank you. Before we conclude, I'd like to recognize one Kiwanian. Today is his 19-year anniversary as a Kiwanian. So Steve Farrow, thank you. Thanks for all you do for us. And with that, we are adjourned. I encourage you to keep attending our programs. Let's keep bringing guests. And again, thank you to our guests who are doing so much good for Indianapolis. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Good to see you, Dennis.